Hello, welcome. My name is Erin Smith. I am a professional tarot reader and an associate marriage and family therapist in the state of California. And I welcome you to my channel. I am doing these readings both to disseminate information about the intersection of practices like tarot and more traditional forms of psychological investigation, specifically how the tarot intersects with attachment theory and understanding our attachment strategies, our attachment behaviors, and how how we learned to cope with our environment when we were at the earliest stages of development has affected us, how we carry that into our adult interactions with the world at large, and how that affects our perception of self. And, my objective is always to offer insight and be helpful, certainly in times of distress or uncertainty. And I would say that collectively we're in a time of uncertainty, most definitely. I was thinking about what question I wanted to investigate this morning through the cards. And I was thinking about the necessity of developing one's intuition in a time where deception and misinformation are rampant. And you can think of intuition as being an internal compass that gives you a sense of what feels right and true. And, obviously, many people come to me for readings. They have done so for over 10 years. And it is a topic that comes up pretty frequently that people don't always know what they feel. They have a hard time going within and tracking what their immediate emotional reactions to things are. They tend to get very overly involved in this sort of logical, analytical way of perceiving, and they're not so comfortable or familiar with what it feels like to track sensations in the body and to free associate in terms of what impressions arise, what messages come through in relation to this sort of somatic sensation in the body. Intuition is incredibly powerful and certainly worthy of building this muscle in order to gauge how one might wish to move through the world when there's a lack of information. So I guess my question today, I'm going to put it to the cards, is simply to ask, what is intuition? How do we develop it? What is its purpose? And anything else that Spirit wants to add that would be helpful for us to understand and cultivate this type of sensory experience so that we might more effectively and efficiently navigate the world at large. So I'm going to go silent. I'm going to concentrate while I shuffle. I will be with you momentarily. I'm just going to say a prayer over these cards. Hmm, 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 hmm. Wow, it's a really interesting answer. And some of these cards have been coming up in previous readings that I've been doing lately. What I find super interesting is this one. So, the way that I would interpret this is that the devil represents the reasons why many people or many of us are cut off from our intuition. It is this illusion of separation, this palpable experience of giving our power away to people, places, and things outside of ourselves, and really to the material world itself. It is like really what one might refer to as scientific materialism. This concretization of forms out in the world and the solidity of them, that this certainty of mass and form, and that a table is a table under all circumstances, and that it is distinctly separate from myself, and that there are rational, objective experiences out in the world that are separate from subjectivity, and uh, that my thoughts and feelings do not have an effect on reality that exists out there in the world. This perception is kind of a prison. I mean, okay, so, my background is in Buddhism. I'm not an expert. I wouldn't even call myself a Buddhist scholar, but I've studied it and I've engaged in Buddhist practice of meditation for many, many years. And, certainly, more skillful and informed teachers than I have shared this information with me, that in Buddhism, there is conventional reality and unconventional reality, and that they coexist together. So the Buddhist is not denying that this is a table and that it has form and mass, and that it feels solid to our way of interacting with it as dictated through our five senses. There's no disputing that. But then there's also this bigger perspective that coexists alongside it. And that is that this table is made up of many different components that are both present and not present in this moment. That this table is actually made of wood, and that the wood was taken from trees that once grew out in the world, and that those trees contained a mixture of the elements, the sun, that caused photosynthesis and for the tree to grow, and drawing up water through the roots and feeding that through the cellular system of the tree, the nutrients from the soil, the many people that came together to cut down that tree and to mill the wood. And just there is this infinite web of interconnections that are present that needed to happen in order for this table to be in existence, and that you cannot separate this table from that web of interconnections. And then even from this quantum physics perspective, this idea that on some level this table is made up of particles that are moving very fast in order to give us the experience of its own solidity. But in fact, that there is more empty space between those particles than the particulate matter themselves. And so on some level, this table is, the solidity of it is an illusion. And so really what I'm talking about here is perspective, consciousness, our awareness of certain things changes our relationship to the thing itself. And when we see things as separate, when we decide that certain things have more power, for instance, that the world is dictated to us through this certain set of rules, and that our perception or our personal experience cannot affect those rules, this becomes a kind of prison. We've given our power away. We have denied that, in fact, our experience does have a dramatic effect on the way that we move through the world. And in fact, neuroscientists are talking about this quite a bit. This idea that our brains are constantly engaging in something called predictive processing. And in fact, we don't really see the world as it is, simply because the amount of sensory information that is coming through our brains at all times, were we to actually track every bit of sensory information that is readily available at any given moment, we would just shut down. We wouldn't be able to do it. There's just not enough, there's not enough RAM in our brains in order to be able to take in that information and make a cohesive assessment of what it is that we're engaging with, or what the experience is that we're having. And so there are these filters that our mind has in order for us to not become overwhelmed by the sensory input. And so, in other words, when you are out in the world and you see a tree, your mind takes in that information, the light bouncing off of the tree, and it comes through your senses, and your brain is making sense of what this is. It essentially compares this information to what is already in your predictive model of the world. It compares the input to what already exists in the predictive model, and if it's relatively close, then really no new information is taken in. You take it for granted. That's a tree. I know what that is. Here it exists in my storehouse of awareness. And so, in other words, what the neuroscientists are saying or proposing is that in order for you to take in new information and update your predictive models, there has to be a prediction error. So you have to take in sensory information, and there has to be a discrepancy between what you're seeing, thinking, feeling, and what exists in the predictive model already. And what neuroscientists are saying is that if it's too wildly different, then no new information comes in. But if it's too similar, no new information comes in. So there's this sweet spot of being open and receptive and uh, having a heightened sense of sensory clarity in order to, moment by moment, take in this new information and update the predictive model. And it requires us to have a certain level of open-mindedness. If we already think we know what's happening, if we already think we know what we're looking at, if we think we have all the answers, then it's hard to take in any new information. So this sort of rigid worshiping the part of our brains, or worshiping, political systems or economic systems, and they've just always been this way. And so we're not going to question them. We're going to fall in line with the way things are. Then we never have an opportunity then to ask ourselves, is there maybe a more elegant way of thinking about this or feeling about this in order to be more aligned with what is happening in the present moment? And again, it requires a certain kind of open-mindedness. I always think of the Page of Swords as being what is described in Buddhism as beginner's mind. And it means that we are being called to move through the world like children. So the mind of a child is fascinating, actually. It's every neuron in the brain of a child is lit up. There are all these neuronal connections that are firing at all times because a child is taking in new sensory information every second, in order to formulate these systems in the brain, in order to understand the world around them. And in fact, there's some comparison to psychedelic studies and, the benefits of psychedelic medicine, specifically in treatment-resistant depression. You can think of like depression as being this very narrow view, that there's only one way of seeing things, that you can't see any other possibilities. It's that dark tunnel. There's no way out. There is no hope. There are no other options. It is this very narrow perspective. And so imagine if that is your well-worn neurological groove, to all of a sudden light up all the neurons in your brain, and all of a sudden there are many multiple solutions that you never saw. There are many multiple ways of doing something or interacting with something. All these possibilities that just simply weren't in your field of awareness when you were stuck in this one narrow groove. And so again, going back to like engaging with the world with this childlike wonder of being open to receiving new information, new insight, new vision, really developing a kind of sensitivity which requires a kind of mindful ability to track what is going on in each moment, checking in with your experiencing and noticing how you're feeling in relation to some interaction that you're having, checking it with the somatic sensations in your body and noticing the quality of sensation. Noticing what thoughts arise in your mind when you're experiencing this emotional type body sensation. Notice how it affects your behavior and the actions that you take out in the world when you're in the throes of some anxiety or anger, when you're feeling calm and pleasant. How are the actions that you take different? And really coming into some present tense awareness of who you are as you move, or what you feel, or what you see, or what you think as you move about the world. And this kind of beginner's mind is a way of starting to track sensation. Intuition is really a feeling. I mean, it can come in the form of maybe visual impressions, or maybe there's some mental impression that you have. But, there's a reason that it's sort of referred to as like trust your gut, or, there's this overarching sensation that something feels a certain way, that something feels right or doesn't feel right. And many times these impressions defy logic, certainly people talk, and, I'm going to just bring this up now because I think that it is, first of all, just incredibly fascinating. And certainly it is exploring a lot of this information in depth. So for any of you out there who haven't been listening to the telepathy tapes, I highly recommend that you check out this podcast. It is fascinating. And it is exploring topics like telepathy or premonitions, and what that experience is like, and who has access to that experience, and where it comes from. And it's kind of a slow burn. Kai Dickens, I believe, is the woman, I believe that's her name, who was the creator of this podcast. And she is, talking to different people with both from a personal perspective, and then also researchers. Um, Diane Hennessy Powell is a PhD, and she has conducted research about telepathy and ESP. And as you know, there's a lot of reference to Rupert Sheldrake's work. And, one of the conclusions that they come to is that we are all a part of a field of consciousness. And that within this field of consciousness, um, we have the ability to experience other people, that we're not separate. We are not as separate as we think. That there isn't this hierarchy of sensory input, that as much as we might think that there is. And that if we are open to receive, to connect, that we can have access to the consciousness of other beings, that we can feel into what's going on with others out in the world, regardless of geographical location. And, many of these conclusions that they come to are profound and astounding, and have incredible implications in terms of the kind of world that we could be living in. It occurs to me that telepathy is a form of highly developed empathy, this ability to feel into what's going on inside of someone else. And this is certainly something that I practice on a daily basis due to my profession. Whether I'm seeing a therapy client or I'm seeing a tarot client, it is my job to attune to what's going on inside of this person who is coming to me for help, for insight, for guidance, for accurate mirroring. And if I am not open to feeling what's going on with them in the moment, then it is impossible for me to help them. It is me bumping up against me and the limitations of my own separate sense of self. But if I can set aside the me in order to become we, then there is this opportunity for us to co-create an experience that is healing. I mean, I'm even going to suggest that the work that I do with clients is not just me healing them. It is not hierarchical. It is not me with all the power doling it out to people that I'm working with. It is a collaborative exchange that is incredibly valuable for me to have this experience, not only of seeing and feeling the other, but having them felt, seen, and heard by me, and us being in this beautiful, spontaneous dance of human interaction that creates this feeling of love. I mean, really, I have to just say, it is not a romantic love, but it is a feeling of connection. I recognize you, you recognize me, we are recognizing one another together. And this is creating this kind of bond that is transcendent. It transcends just normal sensory input. And it creates the possibility of getting our needs met on a higher plane. You know, pentacles typically represent the material, tangible ways that we get our needs met in the world. It's why they're often associated with money or career. But you can think of it in this way. I mean, look, we are embodied souls, you know, and it does mean that the material world is very real to us. We need to eat, we need to feed our bodies, we need to put a roof over our heads. And what Spirit is saying is that if we are cultivating this high level of empathy, we are feeling into what it is to be a human and what other humans might be experiencing out in the world, and being very open to receiving that information. Then there is this possibility to have this kind of something akin, like to have an intuition, to have a sense of knowing what something is, even when we don't have all the quantifiable data to back it up. Um, and that there's something beneficial about this kind of connection or this kind of exchange or this kind of experience, that it actually meets our needs in a very high level way. And again, a major component to this process, to practicing this process, is mindful awareness. So the way that I conceptualize strength, it's taming the beast within. It's mastering your mind so that your mind doesn't master you. And ultimately, what I have discovered both within myself and people that I work with, you know, a lot of us get tripped up by overthinking things, over identifying with the narrative that is being constructed in every moment in the mind. We think too much. And that thinking becomes distorted by emotions that we're not aware of or tending to in a good way. And so we get super caught up in what we think is going on and building these stories or narratives around what we think is happening based on what's already happened. And there's a kind of negativity bias that goes along with this, where the more that we're up in our minds, the less we're able to connect to others in this field of awareness, uh, where we are feeling into what is needed in each and every moment. And so really what I usually describe with strength is like it's important to build this muscle of concentration, to be able to keep our attention focused on that which we wish to engage with so that we're not getting constantly pulled into some obsessive narrative. Or even if we're noticing that there's a lot of mental activity happening and that it is coloring our perception in a less than skillful way, at least to disidentify from the thinking as though it is us, right? To not overly identify with the narrative as though that's the absolute truth, to know that this self that is witnessing activity that's happening in mental talk space is um, is just pure consciousness. And that if I'm identifying with this pure consciousness and not getting caught up in who I think I am and who I think you are and what I think needs to happen in order for X, Y, and Z, if I can come back to the experience of the witness and just notice what's happening in sense space, then there's a kind of spaciousness that gets created where there's room for me to very elegantly pivot or respond in a skillful way rather than come from, again, this sort of concretized sense or idea of who I think I am and how I need to react in this moment. This spaciousness allows me to take the view, to stay in contact with what's going on inside of me internally, but take the view of the other and imagine what might be happening with them. And this spaciousness, this inclusive ability to be with more than one perspective at once, gives me the opportunity then to sort of drop in a very spontaneous way, respond to what is going on in the moment, which I also think is very much related to intuition. Um, you know, Hanged Man is about having a radical shift in perspective. And again, pretty much since the age of enlightenment, we have been in this fixation on the material world. You know, some people refer to it as just like the billiard ball theory of reality, where these distinct and separate objects are enacting on one another, they're bumping into one another, um, and that particles behave in a predictable manner. And in some ways, this age of reason has robbed us of the ability to connect with the spirit of all things. That, there was a time in human history where we believed that everything had a spirit, that animals and objects and plants had a soul, had a spirit, and that when we were open, we could receive um, insight, guidance, information. Like if you were sick and you went and consulted the plants would let you know what medicine you needed to heal your sickness. And it's because you honored the sentience of the plants that you were open to receiving that. And this is a kind of necessary way of being, again, to zoom out, to take a bigger view than the one that we've been enslaved by for a very long time. That the tree or the rock are just inanimate objects, and that I can do whatever I want to them. I can extract the wood and the minerals, and that there it is of no consequence to me other than earning money. That in a world where we've stripped everyone and everything of their soul, then it's so much easier to extricate, to transact what I think I need and be removed from the consequences of it. And the consequence is, on some level, that if I'm hurting you, I'm hurting myself. And if I am disembodied, disempowered, if I can't acknowledge the my own soul, let alone yours, then it is easy to do a lot of damage. It's easy to be self-destructive, to destroy the environment. And I think it's kind of the antithesis of intuition. If intuition is a kind of feeling into what is needed in each and every moment. And I'm able to do that because I'm open and attuned to the consciousness of others. This is the radical shift in perspective that we're being asked to open up to. This guy's Odin. He is the Norse god of wisdom. And he hangs himself from the tree of life in order to be enlightened. So in order to have the most enlightened perspective on any given situation, we have to take everything we think we're certain of and examine it from the opposite perspective. Much like hanging upside down. It's easy to take it for granted. This is just the way things are. I see it like this every single day. And this is just how it is. And then when I shift my perspective, when I see things from a different point of view, then all of a sudden new insight, new information is available to me. I'm able to respond in a more immediate way, a less shut down way. I'm less operating out of the predictive processing part of my brain and more open to the prediction error part of my brain. And consequently, the world seems a lot more alive from that place. I'm not taking things for granted. I'm not on autopilot. I am allowing that sensory clarity to reach me in each and every moment. And, according to spirit, this is what creates a sense of family, connectivity, love of self and other, love of the world at large. The Ten of Cups is a card that I associate with the feeling of family. Like we are a family of people who live on this planet with one another. We are interrelated in a very real way. I mean, geneticists will tell you that. That we contain genetic markers of everything that exists on the planet, that there's actually very little separation between us genetically. We are family, and this feeling of interconnectivity is wildly beneficial to all of us. And, Spirit is saying it is just a matter of time. I mean, again, I can't recommend listening to the telepathy tapes enough, because really what they're, proposing is that the more people who are open to this perspective or point of view, this acknowledgement of this field of consciousness and this interconnectivity, what, the Vedas called Indra's net. what the Buddhists call the law of dependent origination. When more and more of us become aware of that, it is really only a matter of time before we have a significant paradigm shift and we stop enslaving one another and extracting minerals from the earth to the detriment of all living systems. And we feel into this interconnectivity, and it allows for greater well-being, a greater sense of love and connectivity. And that's a beautiful vision, if you ask me. That's one that I am continuously trying to cultivate. And I'm trying to do my part to stay current and to be in a practice of mindfulness so that I too have greater access to this field of consciousness and interconnectivity. Imagine if we were all operating out of that. People who lied to you in order to get something from you, it would just be obvious and apparent, and you would easily and effortlessly be able to pivot away from that. You wouldn't get sucked in. They wouldn't capture you at the level of your own mental narrative and get you stuck in that well-worn neurological groove. So I hope this has been helpful. I deeply appreciate all of you listening and commenting, and I am wishing you many blessings this week. Take care.